This is Sean with Voices Live On, and I have a woman here today that we're going to start doing your life stories, but we were connected because of your brother Jim. And what is your full name?
Ellen Lenore Adams.
Ellen Lenore Adams. And where do you currently live?
In, I guess it's Milan, Michigan. It's near Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And we are at your brother's place. You came down to visit your brother Jim here in Indianapolis, and your daughter came with you, Katie.
Yes.
Okay, so to start off, where and when were you born?
I was born in Fort Wayne at a hospital that no longer exists. And what was your other question?
And when? What was the date?
Oh, November 24th, 1942.
Do you happen to know the time?
Shortly after midnight, because my mother kept saying I was really born on the 23rd instead of the 24th, because at that time it was during the war and there was daylight savings time in the winter at that time, and she said that I would have normally been born on the 23rd. I don't know how she figured that out, but that's what she said.
Okay, so and what are your parents' names?
Harry Beatty and Viola Beatty.
Harry and Viola. And for Harry, who was his parents?
Mary and Charles Beatty.
Mary and Charles Beatty. And then for your mom, Viola, who were her parents?
Stella. Her last name at the time she died was Bouchard. And my mother's father's name was Ed Schumann.
So what do you know about Harry's parents? What do you know about Charles and Mary?
Not a whole lot, actually. I would visit them. They lived in Fort Wayne. I would visit them with my dad, and I never was really comfortable in their house, so I don't think that I got to know them very well. We would go to Thanksgiving dinner over there, and the whole family would go at that time. But there was something of a feud going on, I would say. Call it a feud, I don't know. Just something that was there in the air all the time between my mother and her mother-in-law, Mary. And because of that, there was something of a strain that I was very aware of. So I didn't really get to know her. And I didn't get to know my grandfather very well. I liked both of them. They were very nice to me, but I probably had this in my background, to not get too close to them or something from my mother, so.
What was his industry, or what did he do? What job or industry?
You mean my grandfather?
Yeah, that Charles did.
He worked at the sanitation department in Fort Wayne,
Okay.
And he had also been trained as a bricklayer, and he helped lay the foundation of the house I grew up in.
Okay.
He was very, very handy. Most people were in those days,
right,
doing things, and so he did help put that foundation.
Do you know where his parents and bloodline were from, like which country or the background?
I believe my dad was born in Ohio, close to Indiana, and but I think my grandfather's family came mostly from Virginia. I think that's where.
And then what about further back than that? Polish, German, French, like what? Do you know that line?
My grandmother Mary had French in her background. I know that, and my grandfather. I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
know what his, what the family, the Beatty family. It was obviously English, Irish, perhaps, but I don't think we paid a whole lot of attention to the family tree at that time when I was growing up.
So for Viola's parents, Stella and Edward, what's a little bit of their backstory and kind of where they're
Well,
from and kind
that
of the
I
same
know a
thing?
little bit more about. They were my grandmother was very young when she married, and was a teenage mother, actually, for both my Uncle Bill and for my mother. And my my mother's father's family was from Germany. There was a member of the family that actually spoke German. So there was a strong connection yet to Germany. And my grandmother, I know my grandmother on my mother's side was probably had mostly Irish in her background. And I do believe that Mary on the other side of the family also had, because they shared a connection. The grandmothers did. They were, and I'm not sure that I would be accurate about what that connection is, as like second cousins or something like that. But they knew each other even as girls, so they kind of had associated with each other. And they did have a family connection, and through the Gulliver, that was the last name, which is an Irish name, of course. And so I think, my grandmother Mary was a part of that Gulliver family. I think. I hope I'm not telling you the wrong things. Maybe Jim knows more about that. But my mother told me all this stuff, but I, only listened with one ear, and when I was very young, and probably was thinking of other things as she was telling me.
Do you happen to know any kind of major stories of things that they went through, and anything that just kind of sticks out about their lives of either grandparents that they accomplished
about the grandparents?
Yeah.
As I said before, I don't have a lot of stories about my dad's parents. I was closer to my mom's mother, and she was a person that all of us the three of us kids really loved. She was fun to be around. She was such a girl herself, I mean, there was something just so lively about her. And I just enjoyed being in her company. And she married several times. And she just is such a memorable person. in our young days.
Do you know about like hobbies or things that she enjoyed doing? Anything of that nature?
She loved gardening. She had a chicken when she was older that gave her an egg every morning, and she just talked to that chicken, and it was like a person that she just really loved. I just remember that so well when we went to visit, because she had this chicken that she loved, and she was, I could tell you a story. She decided one day. This was when she was married to her last husband, and who was a great person. He was just a wonderful person. And she decided one day she didn't like the way her rooms were arranged in her house. So she knocked down a wall to put in, a door or something, but she knocked down a wall. And her husband came home, and he said, "What in the world happened? This place is a wreck." And she said, "Well, I didn't like it that way. We got to build it in a different way, because that was what she was like." And so that was fun. For us kids, that was great. So, yeah, I really liked her.
And what was their house like?
It was small. She lived in Hammond, Indiana at first, when we first, but I think, may have not owned the place she was living in. When I first got to know her really well, when I was real young, they were living in Hammond, and she probably was renting a place there. Her other daughter lived in the town too, nearby, and may have been that they had the property or something, and that she rented this kind of basement apartment. I just remember that place. And then later, she moved to her own house, and it was out in the country. It was very small. That's the one where she knocked down the wall, that little house that she had. That was all hers, and yeah, it was that, and that was in Dyer, Indiana, and it was out, out away from the city ways. That's why that's when she had the chicken.
So did Viola have siblings?
Yes, she had an older brother.
You know his name?
Bill, Uncle. He was my Uncle Bill.
Your Uncle Bill?
Yeah. And
what about Harry?
He had an older brother. His name was Ralph.
Ralph. Uh-huh. What became of them? Do you know what became of?
My Uncle Bill. I don't. When we went to Chicago, my mother and I would have excursions to Chicago. It was a big deal in my childhood to go, and to go to Marshall Fields and one of the museums or the planetarium, and that was a big deal of my childhood. Were these times to go to Chicago, and then we would also visit my grandmother, because Hammond and Dyer are very close to Chicago. So, and we would visit my mother's sister. She was half sister, my Aunt Ruth, and my Uncle Wilmer, and they lived toward the end, when we were going there, they lived in Lansing, Illinois, which was also very close to Hammond and all these other places in northern Indiana. And And when we went into Chicago, we'd go in on the train, and we would visit Uncle Bill and his wife, Aunt Nellie. Aunt Nellie was an invalid, was in a wheelchair, and my Uncle Bill, I loved. He was very funny, very, very fun to be around. He was just a very funny person. I really liked him. Jim invited them to, Jim invited Uncle Bill and Aunt Ruth and Uncle Wilmer. They all came to his graduation from college, because Jim was the first person to graduate from college in the family. So it was a big deal.
It would be a big deal. So we're actually, you know what? We're gonna. Where are we at? Okay, all right, we're at 16. So, how would you describe Viola and Harry's married dynamic? How would you describe them as a couple, like from when you were young, and just kind of what you remember?
The Bickersons.
Okay.
They bickered all the time. And I was closer to my mother. Linda was closer to my dad. So we had different perspectives a lot on our parents as we were growing up. But I think that it was all kind of on the surface, the bickering and everything, because they did such a good job as partners, really, in raising their family. I tend, maybe Linda would disagree, if she was around, would disagree with me. I tend to think a lot of that had to do with my mother's strength in creating I would say an ethical life. I guess I don't know how else to explain it, but that was very much a part of, because my dad had a rougher, this is ridiculous to say this, I would say a rougher childhood, but that's totally not true. If I could tell you the story of my mother's, or maybe you've heard it from other people. Her life was truly full of different kinds of crises, but my dad had a strained relationship with his parents, with his older brother. It was something my mother was very aware of and kind of wanted to protect him from. And my mother was very confident of her parents' love for her, despite the fact that my grandfather put her in an orphanage for 5 years. But she still knew he loved her, and she always was making excuses for them, that, especially for my grandmother, because she was so young. And she was such a girl when she had her children. And so she always forgave them. And she always was sure of her love. Her mother's love and her dad's love. I mean, without a doubt. And I don't know about my dad. You know, there was a difference, and I could even feel it as a child when he would go to their house. And if criticism came toward him or in any way, and he also needed to do so much for his parents. It was like he, you know, as an adult, he was still trying to get their attention or get their love or whatever. But I always felt it as a child, you know. I mean, I may have been greatly influenced by my mother. I'm not saying she didn't put a lot of that into my head, but I also recognized it in him, you know, that there was a need to look out for them and to keep winning their approval in some way.
So do you know, well, where'd your dad go to high school? Did he go to your father? What schools did he go to? Do you happen to know the names of where he grew?
He went only up to the 8th grade.
Okay.
And then his parents asked him to work. You know, they didn't want him to continue. He wanted very much to go to high school, but they wouldn't let him do it. And apparently at that time, that was accepted. You know, if the parents didn't want you to go, you didn't have to go. And
What was his job?
his last job was as a foreman at the International Harvester in Fort Wayne.
Right. Did you know how he started, where he started working, or anything that brought him on that path?
He got any job he could during the Depression. And I know they spent a couple of years in Rome, New York. That's near Schenectady. And that was when Jim was very, you know, a toddler. and when they got back to Fort Wayne, I think he worked in some place first, but then he got this job at International Harvester. And he was so grateful for that job that he was loyal to them to the day he retired. You know, I mean, it was, he would never have left that company because he felt he saved their lives, you know, but to hire him at that time. And they helped educate him as well. He had only gone through the 8th grade, and they sent him to take classes and to school and that's how he got to be, you know, work his way up to be foreman in the.
So do you know, like, being a foreman, like what he physically was doing, what he physically was touching?
No, I'm sure that Jim could tell you because Jim actually worked at the International Harvester
Right.
on his summers off from school, and so he knows a lot about it. And I know that they had a little bit of a disagreement about how things should be in a factory. Jim was very much a pro-union person, always has been his whole life. And, you know, the workers' rights, you know, were important. And being a part of management toward the end of his years with the International Harvester, you know, my dad was not part of the union, you know, so they would have, you know, disagreements about that.
And then your mom, do you happen to know where she went to school?
Here and there, she went to school. It was never, you know, she would rather go sit in a movie theater or something rather than go to school.
Or the name
she
of the
played
school.
hooky a lot.
Do you know the name of the school?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't even know if she did anymore, you know, when she was talking to me about it, because it was, you know, it was just here and there. But she ended up being a highly educated person because she could not read. She could not read. She read everything. She would read a cereal box, any printed word, that was put in front of her, she would read it. And she was, grew up on novels, and she grew up with lots of romantic notions about a lot of things, but she also educated herself.
Was there anything did anything bad happen to either of your parents growing up? Like a car wreck or a thing? Like, was there anything that you learned that, that when they were young?
Yes. My dad was burned badly and had a terrible time urinating after this burn. I think probably pulled a pot off the stove.
Okay.
Boiling water, I think it was that. And consequently, probably, I think doctors thought it was probably, having heard that history, he had severe kidney stones later in life, so badly that he lost a kidney, because of it, So, yeah, that was obviously a very traumatic thing. I think my mom said that he didn't speak for a while after it happened and things like that. He was very young, probably a toddler when it happened. And of course, my mother was put into this orphanage in Indianapolis where everyone spoke German, did not speak English. There she was an English-speaking child. She was 5 years old and was not prepared for it at all. She was just taken on a train to Indianapolis and left in this orphanage. And
You said she was 5.
she was in the orphanage for 5 years.
How old was she when she got put in it?
5.
Yes.
5 years old.
Yeah.
And
wow.
then she was until
Man.
10. And it was my grandmother that got her out when she found out that's where she was.
Why did they put her in it?
What?
Why did they put her in the orphanage?
Well, they didn't. It was my grandfather that did. My grandmother didn't know about it. They were separated and probably undergoing divorce. Maybe the whole thing of the rights, of custody was given to my grandfather. He was the older person. He was almost 10 years older than my grandmother at the time. So he was probably given custody of the children, because my uncle went to the orphanage too. The 2 kids were put in this orphanage, and my grandmother did not know about it. And she finally found out where they were when my mother was 10 years old. And my uncle had tried to burn down the orphanage. He set fire to it with some other boys in the orphanage. And so he was put in a reform school prior to, my mother then getting out of it, with my grand. It may have been my uncle going to the reform school that alerted my grandmother. I have a feeling that my mother told me that. When she found out that they had or that she had been notified, maybe she had been notified that he had been, he was in a reform school for having done this in the orphanage. That's when she first learned that's where her kids were. And she marched in there and apparently, said, I'm taking her out. And she did.
Wow.
She took my mother out.
That's pretty.
It was it's like like a movie
well, it is.
or a novel.
Well, and I mean, just psychologically, for your mom to be abandoned and then taken back, like that's
Well,
to go through
the
that.
abandonment had a very strong psychological effect on her.
Yeah.
She had 3 nervous breakdowns in her life, and she said her first was when she was 5 years old, because she did not speak for months after she entered she would not talk. And the people that brought her, well, everybody around her was speaking German, for heaven's sakes. And she would not talk, and she said the people that saved her at the orphanage were the older girls. They kind of mothered her and brought her out of this terrible depression that she went into at age 5. It certainly affected her whole life.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
Yeah. But she also, her mother, was her hero, definitely, because she was so strong about, I'm taking her out, and she knew that, that she was.
Do you know what some of her favorite things were? Like types of music, types of food, types of books, things that maybe you remember her really liking?
As I said, reading was almost all.
But specific, like any novels that stood out, or
at that time, there were these romantic novels. Romance type novels. But she graduated from those really to things that would give her information, and things that would help her know how to do things. She became an accomplished seamstress, cook, her father taught her how to cook because he owned a restaurant at one time. But all of these things, anything that would give her information, that she would be able to do things, she would search it out in books.
Do you remember anything specifically like that she made, like being a seamstress, or like any around the house or anything? Or
she made all my clothes and all my sister's clothes. I think she probably made many articles of clothing for Jim. She made men's sports coats. She made winter coats. I mean, some of the really difficult, types of things, she did it. All from learning how to do it by reading, following patterns, and learning about how fabrics work together, how to cut a piece of clothing. I mean, she was phenomenally good at that. But she also always said, but it was not natural to her. It was something she learned to do. She got to be extremely good at it. She always talked about her hands being so steady and able to do this kind of work, so much. But she said she was a natural cook. That came naturally to her. And that understanding of the chemistry of foods was something she said that she really took to and understood just by, somebody showing her, then she would experiment and find out. So she was an extremely good cook, and she felt that was the thing that came naturally to her. But sewing was a work for her. She had to work at it, but she was really good at it. I've got pieces of clothing yet.
That are still holding strong.
That's still, yes.
So how did they meet? How did Viola and Harry meet?
They grew up together. I mean, those families were connected in some way. And as I said, I don't know quite how, and maybe.
So we talking grade school? Are they talking like through the school years of their life?
Well,
They knew
they
each other?
lived in probably separate parts of the town. They did live in Fort Wayne. But of course, my mom was gone for those 5 years. I think they probably knew each other as very young children. They may have not even remembered each other. But later, I don't know exactly when they got sort of back together because she lived with her dad. Her mother got her out of the orphanage, but my grandmother was, a person that lived life each day, as what would come to her, and she was, and then she had 4 husbands, I think. I'm pretty sure 4. And so she had her own life that was very, very active life. And my mother eventually went to live with her dad. As a teenager, she was living with her dad in Detroit. So I'm not sure when my dad and mom actually got back together, but they had known each other.
So did they date
all
in high
of their
school?
Lives. What?
Did they date in high school?
They weren't in high school, remember?
But around that time?
Oh, you mean at that
Like in
time,
their
at that age?
teens, you think? Like were they lifelong loves and it started when they were in their did they ever break up? I guess it's kind of the bigger question.
Yeah, they did.
They did?
They did. I think that my mom didn't want to marry him
Okay.
at some point, or kind of hesitated because it was, yeah, they did break up because I know that it upset my dad. But she was not wanting to get married. And she wasn't sure she wanted to marry him.
Do you think that was in their 20s?
Well, let me think about, okay, she had Jim 4 years after they were married. And she was what? 20, yeah, it must have been the very early 20s that okay. When, I can't even tell you the year they were married. I'm trying to remember.
Do you know where they got married?
I imagine Fort Wayne, but I don't know for
Okay.
sure. I know they went east on their honeymoon, and my dad's best friend and his wife accompanied them. And my mom was mad. Even though she liked this friend a lot, she thought, what the heck? Why does he have to come along on their honeymoon? I know. Yeah.
So they start their marriage in Fort Wayne.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think they lived there their whole, except for the time they were in New York when Jim was real young.
So I'm assuming their first house was also your first house and the kids' first house, like their first house together.
No. Yeah, maybe, but they lived somewhere else. I'm not sure where, but they didn't live in that house was built. They had that house built. that we grew up in.
On Drexel.
Nobody else had, yeah. When I said my grandfather helped build the foundation of that house was built. But it was my mother's plan to move out. They may have been living with her in-laws and my grandparents. I can't remember. But when she found out she was pregnant, she said, we're gonna get out of here and get our own place. So they had that house built, and then my dad lost his job, and that's why he got this job to go to New York. And I'm not sure what he was doing in New York, but he got a job, and he had to go to New York for it, New York State. And so they rented the house while they were gone for those 2 years. But when they came back, they moved in there, and then that was their house from then on.
So as they basically have the house, they have, what, 4 years after having the house, Jim's born? Like 4 years after marriage?
No, Jim was right. They had the house built, and then when Jim was a baby, he must have been no more than a year or younger, is when he got transferred to New York State, my dad. And so the first 2 years of Jim's life was in Rome, New York. And then they came back to Fort Wayne, and he got that job at International Harvest.
And that house was the 2226 Drexel.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're going to close this segment out, but you covered a lot.